and we have 3 panelists. This will be a more interactive session, but I will let Mr. Pauling to give you a little bit of a briefing about how he will run this session. Okay, so you can, of course, continue to enjoy your lunch, but we'll get started with our business panel.
Good afternoon, everyone. This is the, let's see if I've got the right piece of paper, doing business in Asia. That's what this is. You know, I was at a meeting the other day and I heard the most amazing statistic, and I asked twice. For the last 5 years, China has opened 1 airport a month. You want to talk about business opportunities in Asia? Worth a thought. At any rate, you're not here to hear me, you're here to hear these great panelists that we have assembled. I'm going to start by asking each of them to introduce themselves. You've got their bios in your packet there, but if each of you, starting maybe with Chris, could just give us a little 5-minute précis on your background and how you are related to Asia.
Certainly. My name is Chris Timmons, and I currently work at CN, Canadian National Railway. I am a Senior Solutions Manager in our Supply Chain Solutions Group, which is the group under CN that does all of our non-rail supply chain offerings. And as part of that, we operate a group called CN Worldwide, which I'm responsible for, and that is our international freight forwarding group. And what that means, if you're not familiar with freight forwarding, it's basically a travel agent for freight, is the way a lot of people put that. It's a lot more complicated than that, but you know, really arranging end-to-end solutions, door-to-door, internationally, import, export, that tie in with our rail network. And I've been doing this at CN now for about 2.5 years. Prior to that, I worked at an international third-party logistics company, various positions with them throughout the US and Canada, and been exposed to working the international logistics, both air freight, ocean freight, warehousing, trucking, and other supply chain solutions for customers in a variety of different business segments, from high-tech to pharmaceuticals, food, retail, fashion, and has really given me a broad perspective of what each of these industries deal with in importing and exporting their cargo. And I hope that my experience will give you some good insight from at least the shipping part of doing business in Asia.
Thank you. Chacko?
My name is Chacko, Kurian. I don't have 5 minutes of stuff to tell you guys about. We're a small business. I own 2 businesses, and I'm pinch hitting for Poonam Gupta, from Laika Enterprises. She should have been here, but the U.S. Navy called her for an urgent consult. So I'm not as pretty as she is. So I started out after graduate school, founded a company that did development of software. When you don't get a job, you hang up a shingle called consultant. Here's a way to do this. And that developed into a company that did software development, which then we went to India and started a 60-person development organization. Ran it pretty well for 10 years, and then business moved in a different direction, so we had to close that business. So I went and acquired another company called Complete Health Systems out of Kansas. And now we've grown that company to a fairly decent revenue. And I was amazed at what we saw this morning about all the help the state gives you. We have all kinds of products in the US. What Complete Health Systems does is write very specialized software for the health insurance business. And we've partnered with some people with some very unique solutions, especially for countries, emerging economies as well as less developed countries where they don't have the infrastructure that you have to deliver healthcare. So I'm excited about it, and we've been able to look at some countries in Latin America, run the model there, and hopefully be able to transfer that to other countries like China and India. So I make about 2 trips a year to India, and I study the local economy. We have a software development team out there, so that's the reason I go there. However, this is the time when I think we should start looking at exporting some of these services, not just goods. Goods you sell and then you're done. Whereas with services, you continuously have cash flow coming in, and that's what we're looking at. So I hope my responses are relevant to you guys, because I'm sitting next to 2 big shots. They've got big companies.
Thank you. James, your turn.
Good afternoon. I'm very pleased to be here. I'm James Waite. From 1997 until the end of 2010, I lived and worked in China. During that time, in the role as a general manager, I established footprint for 3 different U.S. companies in China. I was also a member of the American Chamber of Commerce in Shanghai and was the committee chair for the Suzhou chapter, which is representing all the companies that are located in the city of Suzhou. While I was in China, I traveled to 11 different bordering countries, either for business or for personal travel, having a good understanding of the infrastructure in those 11 countries. Let me expand a little bit on the 3 companies that I was involved with to give you an understanding of my background. First company was a JV, Chinese partner, an American partner. This was a startup JV. I was recruited to go to China and work in. This first time I'd been offshore working in another country. It was a very interesting experience, because when you're in a JV and you're in the GM position, you're managing relationship between the 2 partners. And if you want to have a successful business, you got to have a decent relationship between the partners. We were making a ball valve, industrial ball valve that's used in the oil and gas industry globally. Our Chinese partner was responsible for the Chinese market. Our American partner was responsible for the international market. This was really a great learning experience for me. As I said, first time offshore, I'm learning something about the culture, learning about dealing with the people, learning about doing business in China, but also learning that I needed to get out and form my own network of fellow expats and people that I could develop my own sounding board to have people to be able to talk to. The next company I work for is a Chicago-based company. This is Sloan Valve Company. Sloan makes flush valves and automatic faucets. The washrooms here have their products, in case you're not familiar with them. They did not have any operation outside the United States. And they gave me a blank piece of paper and said, if you can figure it out, maybe we'll fund it. And I started out by evaluating whether Beijing would accept this type of business in China. And it was considered an encouraged business because water-saving features, saving water was starting to be very important in China in the end of 1999 and 2000, still is. So from there, we went on to doing market studies, who the competition was, the local competition, the international competition, what our market would be, how we would go to market. Then we started looking at geographically, where would we locate this business? And we decided that the best location would be about a 200-mile radius outside of Shanghai. Not in Shanghai, too expensive to start a business. And so I put the plan together, the company funded it, and we formed a business. And this is a wholly owned subsidiary, completely different type of structure for the business. We went from no employees to 87 employees. The primary objective of this company was to sell American products into the Chinese market. This can be done, but I'll tell you right now, it's very difficult. You have no brand recognition. You're building every inch of what you're trying to do in the market. We set up our own distribution system. I had my own staff of salespeople throughout China, and I used to wander around waving the home company flag whenever there was an important developer or construction company, so they knew there was a presence of the American inside China. The last company I worked for, equally famous, but for the consumer, this is Weber Barbecue. Weber had a Hong Kong office that was out looking for vendors. And they were in the process where they wanted to start manufacturing a low-cost gas grill in China, but they had no employees inside China to be able to do this. So they hired me to start a company so they could legally employ people. And so I put together a whole supply chain management company, which ended up being about 25 employees managing 25, 30 different vendors throughout China and Asia, exporting over 100 million US per year. This company was also working with designs, and we would be the in between the home office design team and our vendor design team. And we were doing this at the same time that we were in the process of ensuring quality, that when it got back to the US or to Europe or to Australia, and they opened the box, everything would fit together and it would work. And so I had a group of project engineers as well as quality people that were reporting to me. All three of these companies still exist today. I still see my employees occasionally when I go back. A lot of them have moved on into very important roles in other companies. No, that's my experience of being in Asia. Today I have my own consulting business, Ops Asia. I work with small to mid-sized American manufacturers that want to do business in Asia, or Asia companies that want to come to the US.
Jim, I got to ask you a question. In today's current climate, here you are with Sloan Valve. Why didn't you manufacture the product here and just export it there?
We did manufacture all the intelligent part of the product in the US. We manufactured items that were high labor, basically low-cost components in China. We either manufactured them or we sourced them. We even had a brass foundry that was very modern. And if you know, when you look at faucets, which is one of the things we were making, they're all polished, smooth, and they look very nice. So way back in 2000, we were putting robotics into our factory because this is a very labor-intensive process, and it's also extremely dirty. And so we did these kind of things in China, but all of the intelligence of the product that we were selling was being imported in, and we were marrying it with local product to be able to have enough margin so we could compete in the marketplace.
Thank you. For our kind of our second round here of presentations, I'd like each of the panelists to give you some advice on the three most important lessons that they've learned doing business in Asia. It's hard to generalize because China is so different from India, is so different from Indonesia, but specific to your experiences, if you were talking to a young person, mentoring someone, and say, look, here are the three things that are the most important when you're doing business in that part of the world. Anybody want to take a crack at the...
I'll start.
Yeah, please.
I think one of the most important things is be humble and don't be arrogant. Don't try to come in as the know-it-all and the cowboy American, if you will. Recognize that you are dealing with different cultures, and it is, varies across different countries in Asia. And, try to take the attitude of, learning as much from the people you are doing business with. Try to, be respectful of their opinions and really learn. And I think that goes a long way. And I've seen people try to, afraid that they'll be taken advantage of if they don't act from a point of view of being the expert. But I think that, it's more important to recognize what you don't know and try to, make sure that you're dealing with people that hopefully you can trust. Ask for opinions and really demonstrate the quality of humility. That being said, I think one of the second things is as much as you want to trust the other person, don't always take things on face value. And yes doesn't always mean yes, and it often means something other than yes. And be aware of that. And I know in my, I have a lot of conference calls with Asia on a weekly basis and our team in China, and start to quickly understand when yes means yes and when yes means no, but I just don't want to disrespect you, or yes, I'm just not going to disagree with you over the phone. And so I think that's an important lesson to learn too, and learn to when to recognize when, one word can have multiple meanings, I think is very important. And I think you can deal with that with, I've learned to follow up in writing after calls and try to verify things in writing. Sometimes things get lost in translation, and I think that's an important lesson. And I think finally what I would say is build relationships with people and understand that that is an important part of doing business. And in many of the Asian cultures, sometimes, the pre-talk of a meeting can be just as important as the business details. And don't overlook that. And I think a lot of times, we as Americans and sometimes, Europeans as well, depending on where we are, will take this, let's get down to business. And it's very important to, talk about family, talk about, your trip, how you're doing, and don't overlook that part of the conversation. Because a lot of times that goes to building that trust, which is important to doing business. And I think that sometimes that can be overlooked very quickly.
Great advice. Great advice. Chacko?
I'll take a shot at that. Like the cultural issues that you talked about. I'm from India, but I went back to India to start a company about 10 years after I came here. And I got used to the US. Now you go back to India and you find everything takes longer. You got to have a Man Friday to deal with a bank because you have to stand in line or you have to know someone to get ahead. And that's what, when we started, it used to cost us, we used to transfer files by CompuServe, which was terrible. Some of you might not even remember what CompuServe was. It cost us $2 a minute to talk on the phone. All that changed because of what we did. However, there are things that you wouldn't even think of here. For example, I found a number of my engineers getting recruited by a larger company. They went to large corporate companies on the size of IBM, not because they paid them more or the work was better, but because their value in the marriage market. Remember, the dowry goes up if you work for a big company. I've had people come to our offices, prospective brides' fathers, to verify if the man really works here and he really makes the money he's making. So these are things you've got to be prepared for. Again, you need to have a man Friday who knows all the local stuff. You have delays that you never anticipated. For me to get a bank statement or a letter from the bank is a phone call, and I get it. Over there, people think that they're more important. Their level of importance is measured by the number of people waiting to see them. So you have to work with the local culture. It's a local cultural thing. Otherwise, doing business, everybody understands money. So when you're buying services, you find out, like, we rented an office building, and then we installed a generator. Then the city came in and told us that the landlord had no permission to build his building where it was. It had crossed the city line or something of that sort. I thought, okay, now we're going to have to demolish the building. It's not our building, but then what about all my employees? Turns out he went and talked to him and fixed the issue. I don't know what he did, but he fixed it. It was no longer a problem because we were able to install a generator. So these kinds of things, it takes local people to do that, and you need to work with them. So be prepared for that. Be prepared for delays. Be prepared, again, I'll repeat, don't go around saying, I know everything. Be humble. That's about all I got.
If I can just add one thing here about getting things fixed. There's getting things fixed and there's getting things fixed, and you do not want to run afoul of what is called in this country the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act. This has to do with bribing people to get business. It was passed by the U.S. Congress in the, I got to get the dates right, the late 70s, after it came to light that the Lockheed Corporation, which at the time built commercial aircraft, had basically driven $1 million in 2 crates up to the Japanese equivalent of the White House and left it there for the Prime Minister of Japan so that he would choose the Lockheed aircraft for ANA, All Nippon Airways. And the U.S. Congress was absolutely shocked that an American company would do this sort of thing. And it passed the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, which basically said you can't do that. Publicly owned corporations can't. And over the years, it's been refined and so on. But the penalties are quite stiff, and you really don't want to be doing that. It's one thing to get a parking ticket fixed. It's another thing to be paying someone under the table. And the temptation is mighty throughout Asia to do this. But I encourage you not to, because as one really smart person told me one time, once you start, word will get around that you will pay bribes, and then everybody will have their hand out, and you'll never get anything done. So that's my 2 cents. James, your thoughts on this?
Before James stops,
Sure.
I was not talking about bribes.
No, I know you weren't, but it reminded me. It reminded me.
And I can piggyback on your comment with, as I mentioned, with Sloan, we set up a sales organization and paying to get the inside track on construction jobs was a very common practice inside China, and it was a constant struggle with all my employees that we don't do this, we don't engage in this. And it was so open that when we'd go see a purchasing manager in a hospital that was under construction, before he would even talk to us, he wanted 10,000 renminbi before he'd even talk. So this is very common practice, and you do need to learn or teach your employees you don't engage in this, and you need to find some creative ways to get around it.
How did you get around it?
We took the upper road and said we're not going to engage in that. We have a superior product. We're a very well-known international company, and we have the image that other international companies are going to recognize. So we were able to get our product into Beijing Airport. This is not the latest one, but the one before that. And it took a number of meetings with my personally sitting and meeting the number 2 guy at the airport, who was also the party secretary for the airport, to be able to talk about who we were, and partially because I was in China, I could support any issues they would have. They wanted an international image for their airport, so these are stepping stones for being able to get out of this. And we didn't pay them a penny. We took them to dinner once, but that's it.
Yeah, great.
If I can just go into this, while I was in China, I had a number of senior executives that were visiting China, would stop by and talk for several hours about what's it like to do business, what can I learn from your experiences. So narrowing this down to just a few items without any specific agenda of what you're trying to accomplish is difficult. But I think the first one I would remind everyone is you need to do your homework. You need to do your due diligence. And I'll use an example. When I was in China from 97 to 2000, these are the boom years in China. People were coming to China without even thinking, hey, my neighbors, my competitors, everybody else is in China, I need to be there. And I used the example, if you're driving a car, you come to a stoplight, if you're the first or the second car, you're watching that red light to see when it's going to change. And if you're about 10 or 11 back, you're looking to see if the green is going to change before you get there. The meaning is that you're paying attention to what's happening so you can evaluate what you're doing. The people in the middle are just following. Don't be a follower when you're doing business offshore. You need to do your homework. If you're going into price negotiations because you're going to buy something, we're negotiating a contract for land or building or rent, you need to determine from your own calculations what you think is a reasonable price. You need to have an idea what that's going to be before you even enter the room and get into the discussions, because if you're not prepared, you're not going to have a good deal. Even if you do your homework and you think you've got everything organized, you're still going to fall into some pits. With Sloan Valve Company, as I mentioned, we're starting up. We get the first big order for a very small airport. As Richard mentioned, airports is a big business in China. And we imported components, and we didn't have the local-made boxes. So we used the boxes that came from the U.S., and it says made in the U.S., printed, small print on the side. We have a disgruntled employee who leaves the company and runs to the local agencies that we're violating the law because we're selling something that's not completely imported. Well, this is a serious charge. And we spent, I don't know how many man-hours and networking and everything else, but my Chinese employees, through their connections, were able to work through this so that this issue went away and we never repeated the violation. But just a simple little thing like that can really trip you up. So no matter how diligent you are in doing your homework, you can expect you're going to have some hiccups. you need to, and I'll emphasize, you need to understand doing business in the country. And one of the things that people oftentimes do is they say, we got a very successful model in the United States. Let's take this model of how we're going to approach the marketplace and do business in this country. Well, more than likely, your product is not going to be able to sold 100% the way it's made here. You're going to have to make some modifications to meet the local requirements of the marketplace. Your relationship, what you buy, how you deal with the vendors is going to be different than what you have here. An example, in my consulting business, I had an automotive aftermarket potential client. We didn't do business, and you'll see why in a minute. They were buying components from different vendors throughout China, and they were taking these same components and having them packaged differently depending on their customers' requirements. And then they had the vendors shipping them direct to each of their buyers. And this could be South America, US, different places. Well, what happened is the companies that their vendors are huge companies. They understand now where the buyer for this product is. They understand all the requirements to make this product. They're going direct to your customer. So they recognized they had a problem. So they were going to buy the components in bulk. Or they're going to start a company, buy everything in bulk, package themselves and ship so that vendors wouldn't know. But they wanted to lease a part of a building that was one of their suppliers. They didn't solve the problem because the supplier is still going to be in their factory knowing what they're doing. So you really need to understand the market of what you're doing. There's another thing that you should understand about quality. In China, in all three companies that I was involved with, if the product was going to be shipped inside China, the employees clearly felt quality, whatever it is, that's okay. If it's going to the US, it had to be right. And it was a continuous challenge for me as well as my quality staff to insist that all the employees understood we only manufacture to one standard, everyone gets the same quality. So dealing with your employees and getting them to understand is a very important thing of what you're doing. And I'll piggyback on the conference call, the issue that Chris was talking about. We had many conference calls. When you're offshore, the only time that you can talk with the other side is late at night. And we would have three-way conference calls. The US team, my team, and the vendor. And the person in the US who was basically chairing the meeting had a tendency, after each topic was finished, to say, okay. Well, the Chinese partner is just assuming whatever the conversation was, he just agreed to whatever we said. And I had to go back and make sure they understood. You don't say okay. Anything that indicates any kind of an agreement, don't communicate that because there's going to be confusion. The Chinese party is going to assume you assumed it's okay when you were just saying, okay, let's go on to the next item. So it's just little things like this about understanding. I'll leave you with one other example about understanding. In China, when you're visiting people, it's appropriate that you would bring a gift and give to your guest. Example of an American going over there, he bought some nice green baseball caps, and he's handing them out to the people around the table. Well, the meaning for the Chinese is that their partner or their wife is being unfaithful. So as much as your wishes may have been very good, you just created a misstep. The other thing that I would strongly suggest is you need a network. You need to build a network with the local government people. These people can help you through a lot of different issues, a lot of roadblocks that might come up. It takes a long process to build it, but it's very important to you in the future. You need to develop a group of peers, which will be foreigners that are doing business in the same country, so that you can exchange. In all of my situations, I was the only American offshore in that company. There was nobody I could walk down the hall and talk to. Eventually, I had some Chinese that reached a point where our trust and association was such I could go bounce ideas off them. But in the beginning, you have no one. And the people back home, unless they've been offshore, they don't understand the situation you're faced with. So it's very important that you do that, because it's not possible to walk down the hallway and have someone to talk to. I would strongly suggest that you get acquainted with the U.S. Commercial Service. They are been very valuable to us. They helped us in Shanghai. The group would introduce us into new construction high-rise buildings that were going up, so our team could go in and work with the appropriate people. In Beijing, the commercial group, we went to visit them. This is at the time when the U.S. is about to build a new embassy. I wanted to find out who I could contact to get inside. And when I sit down with the person from the commercial service, he says, "We know Sloan Val. You're as close to a monopoly as they can get." Sloan used to like to say they had 75% of the market in the U.S. This is a number of years ago. So they do help in introducing you and doing many things. I got to know the person who was the head of the commercial group in Beijing. I met him at trade shows, and he'd always come and look me up and say, "You got any issues, anything we can help you with?" So it was a very positive, very rewarding working relationship. Mr. Wren, I think he's already left. I met him before he started working with the state of Illinois when I was doing research for starting Sloan. Their Shanghai office, Zachary is a very good person. The city of Chicago shares the office with the state of Illinois in Shanghai. So very good to use these people, get to know who they are, because they're a very excellent resource to help you. So that's my 2 cents.
That was about a dime or a quarter at least. I thought that was pretty great. Just a couple of things to underscore what everybody said. It is cultural, and one of the hardest things I think for Westerners to understand, you know, our value here is straight talk, look me in the eye, which is exactly the opposite of how most of Asia operates. It's considered, I can talk about Japan because I lived there for 6 years. It's considered extremely rude to look somebody in the eye. It's extremely rude to give a straight answer. As one of you was saying, yes means, It means I acknowledge that you're in the same room with me. You know, I hear you. Doesn't mean I understand you, but I hear you. I'm in all shades of yes, yes, yes. So you got to be humble when you go into this, because these Asian cultures, Asian societies don't work the same way that ours does. They value different things. They even value, somebody said, you know, we all understand money. We do, but it seems that every culture has a different way of valuing it and of treating it. And that's part of what this is all, what these gentlemen are talking about. Oh, and do your homework. Do your homework. Even big companies. The great story is it Procter & Gamble that made Pillsbury? Somebody, Pillsbury, anyway. Back in the late 70s, Pillsbury decided that what the Japanese housewife really needed was a cake mix that she could bake in her rice cooker. Anybody familiar with Japan and rice cookers and the Japanese housewife? A rice cooker is a unipurpose item, right? It can't be used for anything else because it's been used to cook rice for 4,000 years. But no, Pillsbury said, this is what they need. Went charging into the market. It was very expensive, even in the late 70s, to roll out a new product in Japan. And they were absolutely stunned when nobody bought their product. And somebody pointed out, well, you know, you might have at least done a focus group. And in Japan, a focus group is asking 3 women. You don't even need a big table because they're all going to say the same thing. I mean, it's just the way it is. I was interested, I wanted to ask Jim again about the Weber grills. I assume that was not a product that the Chinese were accustomed to. You know, they had little tiny grills, but nothing like a Weber.
That's correct.
How do you get somebody that doesn't have a lot of space to buy a Weber grill?
Well, let's start with getting the employees to understand the product that they're
yes.
working with. As we all know, because we're in the U.S., what having a barbecue is all about, out in the backyard with friendship and cooking food, they didn't have a clue for what this was all about. So what I did with my employees is I used to invite them in small groups. I had a charcoal grill and a gas grill, and invite them to my apartment. A group of them would volunteer to go shopping with me and buy some food that they would like to try and barbecue. I walked them through the process of preparing the food and then showed them how to cook the food on the barbecue. This became a hit. The atmosphere of socializing and eating, the Chinese love to eat, this became a very popular thing. So much so that I gave each one of them a small Smoky Joe charcoal barbecue. And then I had them all coming back in and saying, we need this for my friends. They want one too. We started doing the same thing with our vendors and teaching them, having a barbecue with our vendors, the key management of the vendor. One of the vendors went so far is that before Chinese New Year, and this is a big event in China, they would take all of the rejected grills out and teach their employees how to cook on them as a celebration for their Chinese New Year meal. So this is how we got the word out. To get to the consumer in China, the path would have been, and this is something I was starting when I left, is you need to start demonstrations inviting people. Most of it's going to come to the young people. They're very interested in something new, trying a new idea, being very social. This would have been an excellent way to penetrate the market with this. The other part of it is the very wealthy who want something U.S. to put out on the deck of their new villa that they just bought.
Thank you. Are there any questions at this point? There got to be questions. We're doing business in Asia. There's got to be 1,000. No? All right, then let's move on to kind of the last portion here, which is what are the 3 best business practices that you would recommend for anybody going into Asia? Chris?
Yeah, certainly. I think a lot of, the best business practices are playing off of what we've already said. But, I think if you're going to be doing business in Asia, find partners that fit your need. Whether you're going to be like James and going over there, or if you're going to be reliant on somebody else, and you're going to be based here, is whether it's, vendors or transportation providers, logistics providers, you know, it's really important that you make that selection based on people that you trust, that have the local expertise, somebody who can stop you before you bring green hats to a meeting, and really don't make those decisions based solely on price, which I see a lot of times that decision is made, because price on a transactional basis doesn't always equate to overall cost. And you can find yourself in a lot of costly situations by trying to cut corners up front. So try to look at the whole picture and realize that you need to find somebody to work with and throughout all aspects of your business that you feel like are the right fit for you and where you are in your business. Another thing I would say that was touched base on is be prepared for things to go wrong. They will. It's an absolute surety. Something will go wrong at some point in time. So don't make your business plan around everything working out perfectly. You need to have contingency plans. You need to be prepared that, you know, a factory may get behind schedule, or a shipment may get held up in customs, or, you know, shipments may be delayed, and there's extra costs to that. And you cannot anticipate them all. And things do change on a daily basis sometimes. And I'll use an example of one of the things that we do as a company is export a lot of dried distillers grains to Asia, and China being one of the main markets for that, or at least at one point in time was. And what dried distillers grains are, it's the byproduct of ethanol production, and it's used as animal feed as a byproduct. And at one point in time, I mean, within one facility, we were doing, you know, 400 or 500 containers of this a week. And that's just, you know, one facility. Massive amounts of this being bought. Almost overnight, a rule change in China, we don't want GMO DDGs. Okay, what do? I mean, you've built a business around shipping these, and a regulation pretty much puts a stop to it overnight. These sorts of things happen, and there's various reasons for it, you know, and on the surface it may be GMO related, or a lot of people believe it's really around controlling supply, demand, and the price of that product. And enough stockpile had been made, so find a reason to reject the product and get the price to come back down. And these sorts of things I don't have any proof of that, but that's, you know, a lot can be had, and you see these things throughout history in that marketplace. So you really do need to be prepared for some of these things you may not have even thought of. And, you know, finally, I would say, going along the theme of doing your homework, you know, validate the information you're being told from multiple sources as much as possible. As much as you may have somebody that you trust, there may always be alternate agendas, and, you know, seek multiple sources for what you're doing. So as you're doing your homework and research, try to get, you know, different areas to get that information.
And as a follow-up to that point, how do you do your due diligence? Who do you rely on, or what organization, what group, what kind of person do you look for to do that?
Well, you know, from my perspective, you know, in the transportation world, you know, I think I come across it in different aspects of the business. But, you know, if I was someone trying to import or export goods, you know, you can deal with multiple providers. And I would suggest, you know, a diversified approach on who you're doing business with. You know, so if you're shipping, for instance, don't rely on necessarily one company to do that, or, you know, go talk to multiple providers and see if you're getting the same answer, and then it's probably a good one. You know, and I think James brought up a lot of it, you know, different resources, chambers of commerce that you can work with. You know, I certainly wouldn't just trust the internet and would talk to people who have done business there and have that experience. I don't know if that answers your question.
I was just going to answer that question too. Is from my experience in India, everybody knows somebody. There's always, if you ask somebody, where can I get this done? Oh, my uncle does that, or my so-and-so does that. So how do you find people to work with? And one of the things that, and this is a shameless plug for an organization I belong to, it's called the Indian American Business Council. They have connections with companies there, and it's, in fact, they're having an event here in September. Got some flyers out on the table. Contact me or Poonam. Poonam is the chair of the organization. Feel free. What they will do is link you up with people all the way up to the Prime Minister's office if you need that, because those are the kind of relationships they have. So don't take, as you said, the first word that you get as the truth. Always check and recheck. Again, use people who you trust and have gone through the same process. Network with them. That'll help you through the same. In my business, it was, when I started, there was only a few software companies other than the large ones, which are just starting up. So we had to do everything by feel. You know, does this work? About a year and a half after we started, they opened up a window, a single window operation, where you didn't have to go from one agency to another to get all your paperwork done. So that was a big help. But they did that only for software and for exports too. So I think being able to find an organization that you can use, and by the way, membership in the Indian American Business Council, the basic membership is free, so you can always go test the waters out. Yeah, so I think use people who've been through the same process or what you're looking for and see if that works. Consultants, always valuable with good track records.
A couple of follow-up thoughts on that. The U.S. Commercial Service, the embassies all publish a country commercial guide every year. And it's a great way to start, to get a feel for the country and some of the regulations that might become obstacles to your business or very favorable to your business. And it's free. I mean, you can go online right now and get the country commercial guides for Japan, Korea, India. They're there and they're up to date, and they are extremely good resources. To Chris's comment about regulations changing quickly, not every government has the requirement to publish something 60 or 90 days in advance in the Federal Register.
Unfortunately.
And China's certainly among them. And to Zach's question, again, on how do you identify people to vet, back in the late 70s, early 80s, I was working in Evanston with a company. We were one of 3 companies that Toyota Motor Company had hired in advance of their first joint venture in the United States with General Motors. And we found out there were 3 companies in the U.S., one on the East Coast, we were in the middle, and somebody on the West Coast, all doing exactly the same thing, which was voraciously combing the automotive press and the popular press for, we had something like 10 categories of information that Toyota wanted on the U.S. auto industry, the United Auto Workers Union, and every week we would write a report, 1 page for each of these 10 categories, and mail it off. And when the mail became too slow, They said, get a fax machine. Okay. Fax machines in 1980 were the size of this podium, if not larger, and they were incredibly slow. But we did that for a while, and then they said, no, we want you to use this thing called a computer modem. So you're going to have to get one of these desktop things that they're talking about. Remember the 8.5-inch disk drives? That's what we had. And GTE came to us and said, we have this new thing we'd like you to try. It's called an electronic mailbox. And so in 1981, I would sit there on Friday afternoon and watch the green phosphor screen transmit at 300 baud a 10-page report to Japan. But that's, technology ultimately drove that. But all I'm saying is Toyota had 3 companies in the U.S. doing exactly the same thing to make sure they weren't going to miss something before they did their joint venture with GM out in Fremont, California. Talk about doing your homework. It is inconceivable to me that an American company would hire more than one company in Japan to do the same thing. Americans have the reputation for, is it Barry Goldwater's saying, ready, fire, aim. They go in and not think a thing about it. Okay, let's continue. Jim, any advice?
Well,
Best practices?
I would think that number one is you need to explore all the options. You heard today people talking about the different countries. Each one of them has different options, different opportunities for you to evaluate. When you look at the Asia countries, the GDP is between 6 and 7%. The Asia population makes up more than 50% of the global population. What do these things mean to you and what business you're going to be doing? Caution, don't look at just the big numbers because, they have opportunities, but they have a lot of problems too. In China, if you're going to look at China, labor costs are going up. China is still trying to transition the country from being the world's manufacturer to being a consuming nation. They've been trying, they haven't really succeeded in doing this. So you need to really determine what your goals are and look at all the opportunities and figure out which one is going to be the best opportunity for you. The other thing, or there's 2 other things that I would suggest. One, you need to be protective of your IP. We can spend all afternoon because this opens up Pandora's box, but you need to be sensitive to this. And one of the experiences that I ran into was a very famous American company that had been in China buying things for a number of years. And then they decided that they wanted to do something where they wanted to use their logo in China. So they decided they're going to go register it. Well, they find some Chinese companies already got it. So this famous American company is unable to use their logo legally inside China. You can always go negotiate and buy it, but the word is, even if you're just talking about buying components from someone, you need to make sure you've started the protection process. Because once you lose it, getting it back is very, very painful. The last comment I would say is that when you're working in a foreign country or doing business in a foreign country, it's not easy. It takes a lot of time and a lot of effort, but you can be successful and make a return on the investment. I encourage anyone that's in this is that they need to be involved in the details. You need to have your own measurements to determine how things are going, not just what people are telling you. You need to have things you set up that you can determine yourself whether that's right. I need to dig further so that you can have an understanding what's going on. In China, the employees in the company, they're all paid on an incentive basis, usually piecemeal. The numbers that get reported back in, I wouldn't leave those numbers for anything. So you need to have your own understanding of what is real and what's not. You need to develop your employees. If you have employees that are working for you over there, your senior staff, you should make arrangements for them to come to this U.S., visit the facilities, build the relationship and the understanding of these people, because if they become committed, they can do more for you than you as a foreigner can do in this country.
Great advice. Any other comments, Jen? Well, then let's end early.
I have a question for maybe Chris and Chacko about infrastructure. I know China, India have been spending a lot of money kind of improving of their infrastructure, both physical infrastructure and IT infrastructure. How have, through what your experience, have that been, making a big difference on the ease of doing business for foreign companies in terms of moving goods, moving people, and also, communications and other those areas.
Yeah, I'll comment on that. I mean, in my experience, the amount of money that China has spent on their infrastructure is just unbelievable, unfathomable to what we're doing here in the U.S. And there has been a lot of improvements, especially in the coastal areas. As you go further inland, I think still a lot needs to be done. But I mean, I think they move at a pace, like you said, with the airports, that's really incredible. And I see a lot of improvements there. I think India, in my experience, is moving much slower than China on that fact. And I've had some customers ship goods in India that are sensitive, furniture and things of that nature. And you start going down the roads there, they're very bumpy. I mean, you end up with a lot of product damage. They're not necessarily on air ride trucks and the sorts of things that we have here, and really end up with a lot of product damage. And I see that less so in China, but I think it's a risk everywhere. But even certain parts of India where cannot move a 40-foot container, which is pretty standard here because the roads are not big enough to take it, and so there's a lot of added costs there, and you may have to find other ways of moving things inland. I think that's my experience.
In India, I told you about the CompuServe and $2 a minute phone calls. Now, if you're going to do business in any of these countries, and that applies to Latin America or India, get WhatsApp. If you don't know what WhatsApp is, everybody there uses it. It's on your phone. You can use it for calls. You can use it to send text messages, and it's like if the government is not going to build a phone line for me, I'm going to use WhatsApp. And that's exactly what happened. They had it leapfrog. Technology I remember when I was a kid, you had to wait 10 years for a phone line, a landline. And so those cell phones are selling like hotcakes right now. That's the only phone system that they use. Infrastructure in India is not as fast as I hear China's revamping its infrastructure. In fact, they're trying to get it done, but there's a question, and I understand that this is because all the land in China belongs to the government, whereas in India, you've got small holdings. It's very difficult to get property rights. So we have to work with it. That's what we do. Businessmen work with the situation as they find it.
I would think you would find that the infrastructure in the low labor cost countries such as Vietnam is not of the standard that you would find in China. China's got a tremendous infrastructure compared to the Western world. You get into some of these other developing countries, although the labor cost compared to China is much lower, there are things that are still being developed, and part of that is the infrastructure.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The first company we did, but it was the way the company was set up. There was a royalty because of the technology that they were leasing to the joint venture. And we were doing that. At first, I didn't believe all the taxes we had to pay on that. I said we shouldn't pay those, but we ended up having to pay them. And in the joint venture, in the Sloan Valve, wholly owned, we kept whatever cash we had to reinvest in the business, so that, because we were looking at a new building and expanding the operation when I left, so we wanted to keep it in there as opposed to them having to invest more money into the property. But you raise a very good point, and that is that if you're going to do business outside the U.S., as much as you're concerned about setting it up and making it successful and making profit, you need to have the plan to get out. And that's equally important. And I was talking with a person yesterday, or 2 days ago, that indirectly we'd known each other for a number of years in Shanghai. And he was in the process of closing down a business in Shanghai, and he was talking about this is 10 times more complicated and difficult than it is to start this business. So you need to have your exit plan so that you know what you're going to be doing if you need to implement.
I have a related question.
Is there a microphone?
Yeah, I have a related question. When you were in China, how did you manage exchange rate risks? Because if you go overseas, you want to make money. You might have taken a loan, and then you find out that the dollar is either stronger or weaker. How did you manage those risks of the exchange rate?
I'm sorry, I'm hard of hearing.
How did you manage exchange rate risks in China?
Most of the time that I was in China, the exchange rate didn't fluctuate too much. And we just built it into our price. Because what we imported it for, we would put that into our pricing and would sell it so that we would not have a problem. The other thing we did while we were with Sloan is we developed product that were for what we would call developing countries. I was controlling this in China because Sloan certainly didn't want it back in the U.S. And we were shipping it to Africa as well as to Latin America. And so the exchange rate, maybe a little bit, but the quality of the product and what we were selling, it could be made up very easily by the profit margin at the dealers. Because it was the final price for all these things in construction contractors, it's all negotiated anyways. It's not a list price deal. And today there is volatility compared to when I was there. The first company, it never changed. If it changed, it was so many digits out that it didn't affect the calculation. It was in the 2000s that it started to change some, but it never affected our business model.
We had a question in the back.
Hi, everybody. So appreciate for that. I have the honor to have some introduction myself and my law firm. And I agree on Mr. Waite. Your speech is very impressive. And I'm from Shanghai, China. I represent a Shanghai-based Chinese law firm. And we help a multinational company to small and middle-sized enterprise to business in China. So like what you said and shared about due diligence and about how to set up a company and do business in China, I think our team, especially our Chinese law firm, would love to provide the legal service and help you whatever the legal part and the business part of do business in China. So very appreciative for this opportunity, and we would love to share some information and productive newsletter about Chinese law. So I would love to share some business card or some information about you after the speech. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Are there any other questions? Zach?
Yeah, actually, a comment about currency risk hedging, and it's all the rage right now. Just because dollar's strong, it's up, it's down. There's a lot of stuff that's happening, and one of the things that's a possibility is you can go to a lot of banks, and there's some companies where they specifically focus on the currency hedging piece, and where they'll help you hedge you can actually allow your customers to buy in the local currency, and about at the same time you can hedge that currency risk via your bank or a third party. And an interesting trick or tip that people will do is they'll split it 50-50. So they'll hedge half of it, for example, or some percentage of it, and then leave the other half alone. So if one part goes up, the other one will go down. So the whole idea is you're hedging the risk, so you just even out your risk profile. So it's an option. So you just talk to your bank or look out, or just do some research to find if there's some options out there. So just a thought.
Thank you. Yes, sir.
Yes. When setting up business in the Asian countries, let's say China, India, is it always very difficult to move the money back to the United States? Thank you.
Is it always difficult to? I suspect it depends on the country. There's not a sort of a general answer to that. China will have different currency regulations than Korea, than Japan, than India. Offhand, do you know what the Indian requirements are?
Well, the thing is, if you are, it's called foreign direct investment, when you actually invest in Indian, you set up a company or you invest in a company there. There are some regulations that says how much of it can be repatriated. But you can also export to a third country in dollar-denominated currency, and there are several ways you can do this. Through either generating more sales to the region where it's dollar-denominated, or because you are of your foreign direct investment, you get to keep a portion of you can remit a portion of your earnings.
Okay. One last thing for those of you who don't know, the International Trade Association publishes a calendar every Friday of international business programs, events, webinars, seminars. It just so happens there is one on the calendar in a couple weeks for how to get out of China, exiting your business in China. I mention that because the calendar is free. All I need is your business card, and I'll put you on the email list. It is a rich source of information on what's going on in the international business community here. So with that, I thank James and Chacko and Christopher. Been a pleasure working with you on this, and thank you for the opportunity.